Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. This is Dr. Halima. Today's lecture, number 2, and it is the title of this lecture is Problems and Pitfalls in Creative Translation. Now, the learning outcomes, you have to, the learning outcomes of this lecture. By the end of this lecture, you would be able, or you should be able to identify problems and pitfalls in creative translation, and hopefully you would be able to start to translate creatively. So these are the learning outcomes, the objectives, the main objectives. It means by the end of this lecture you should be able to achieve these objectives. Now, as you know, now you are well advanced in translation, and you know that a translation, we cannot confine a translation to just movement or transferring ideas or information between two distinct languages. In other words, it's not only moving ideas from Arabic into English or from English into Arabic. Do you understand? So translation is more than that, especially when it comes to creative translation. Now you need to think that when you are translating creatively, you need to interpret different historical periods, dialects, registers from one language into another language. In other words, you need to really you need to have this kind of mind, to differentiate between dreaming and waking. So you need to differentiate between what is fictional and what is not fictional. You need to differentiate between literal and figurative, between thought and word. So translation is really deeper and deeper than that. So you need to understand this, that translation is some kind of a special case of communication. So you need to make sure that you need to communicate a certain message from one language into another. Now, what I have said so far causes some problems in translation. It's not that easy, especially in creative translation. You are bound to face problems. You are bound to face difficulties in translating from one language into another, especially when you are talking about communicating, periods from in one language into another, periods into another language. So you need to be aware that you are bound to face difficulties. Okay. Now what we are going to do today, I'm going to give you some idea about the types of difficulties or problems or pitfalls. Pitfalls like little errors or difficulties you might face in creative translation, and this would happen mainly in, let's say, text. We will be talking about text in poetry or drama or novel or short stories, and we will take examples of from orations or oratory speeches. So we will be talking about certain types of difficulties, and we will be talking about semantic shifts over time. We will talk about difficulties, how to translate poetic license, and how to overcome translating compound words. We will come to it one by one, and then we will see whether we can translate rhyme or verse. I mean, in other words, can we translate poetry into poetry? So, and how about technical terms, and the concepts, certain concepts that lack counterpart in another language. So these are examples, these are types of difficulties you are bound to face in translating creative writing in what we say poetry, in drama, or in novel or short stories. Now let's take example number one, all right? Here. Now, semantic shifts over time. What do we mean by semantic shifts over time? It means 200 years ago or 400 years, here we have an example from Shakespeare. Silly sooth. Now, silly sooth, it was used by Shakespeare about, I don't know, probably 400 years ago, you know, and it meant in that time, it meant simple truth. You know, now how would you translate this silly sooth? Now here, now it means different. Now silly sooth, silly, I will come to this, but the meaning of silly sooth has changed over time, over 400 years ago. 400 years ago, expressions like silly sooth meant simple truth. Now, if we look at this, now, how would you translate this? If you so, how would you translate such words? Silly sooth. Is it A, B, C, D, E, F, or something else? Now you have to think of the change, the semantic change of the words. Silly, sooth. Sooth, it means تهدئة. يهدئ. Sooth him, يهدئ, يلطف. سخيفة, silly. تهدئة سخيفة. I don't know. You know. So you need to understand, as I said, the semantic shifts that took place, you know, over time. Would you translate it الحقيقة البسيطة? Would you translate it as الحقيقة السهلة, الحقيقة المطلقة, الحقيقة المجردة, you know, or الصراحة المطلقة إلى آخره. So you need to be aware of this type of difficulties or problems you might encounter in translating creative writing, and this is an example of semantic change. Semantic change over time, it means the meaning of the expression changes over time. This is one type of examples. Now we go to another type, poetic license. The translation of poetry is probably the most difficult type of translating creatively. You know why? Because it is fraught with difficulties, full of problems, if not impossible. I mean, some people say, well, you cannot, Dr. Halima, translate poetry into poetry. All right? Why? Because it has so much in it that is an ordinary translator cannot really translate it into poetry. Now let's see whether we can achieve this poetic license, this poetic effect. You know, in poetry, you need to look at form and content. You need to look at the form of the verse, or the line, the poetic line, or and the content. Or the content, it means the meaning and the whole thing, the structure and everything. Now, let's look at this example. I'm sure the majority of you have heard of Al-Shafi'i radiyallahu anhu, and his one of the greatest poems I have ever read. So I have chosen the first line of his poetry, of his poem, and tried to use it as an example, how we can, or how can we tackle the difficulties, not only in the poetic aspect of it, but also imagine yourself you are translating something written 1400 years ago. I think is it 1200 years ago? 1200 years ago. Ash-Shafi'i was 1200 years ago. Ash-Shafi'i wrote this poem. Now, how are we going to translate this verse into poetry? Listen or look. Now, again, I know some of you might say, "Oh, please, doctor, tell us which is the correct one." I'm not going to tell you which is the correct one. I'm going to leave it for you, because probably it's in the exam. Why I'm saying this? Because you are expected, I would expect of you by the end of this lecture or seminar to be able to guess, is this translation novel? Is it new? Is it really imaginative? Is it really creative? Is it wow? Is there a wow factor? Look at A. Look at A. The line دع الأيام تفعل ما تشاء وطب نفسا إذا حكم القضاء. يا سلام يا سلام يا سلام. اللهم ارضى عن الشافعي. I love him. Now imagine, look at this. I know it's difficult, it's very hard, but I had to spend some time on translating these 4 or 5 versions of the translation to give you an example that poetry, you cannot translate it in prose. We will come to this point later, but let's look at this translation. A. Let the days do what they want and be happy with whatever that might happen. Now this translation, some of you said, "Oh well, doctor, this is literal." It conveys the meaning, but I leave it to you. There are number B. Let the days do what they want and be happy with whatever fate has ruled. Now look at the first one, A. I've used that might happen. The second one, I have used whatever fate has ruled. Al-Qada. Now C, I didn't translate دع الأيام تفعل ما تشاء as B. I said let life takes its toll, whether you rise or fall. You know, this, takes its toll. It's an idiom. It's really Englishy. Now number D, let the days take their toll and be happy whether you rise or fall. دع الأيام تفعل ما تشاء وطب نفسا إذا حكم القضاء. وطب نفسا, it means be happy whether you rise or fall. وطب نفسا إذا حكم القضاء. حكم القضاء بمعنى whether you like it or you don't like it, whether you feel that you are rising or you are feeling down. Now the E, let life takes its toll and be happy whether you rise or fall. If a question like this, it would be like, okay, which is the most appropriate translation of this following verse? I wouldn't mention 5 options, I would mention 4 options. Now you look, okay, which one is the most appropriate? I leave it to you, you know. So this is how you translate poetry or poetic license. Now we move to this third type of difficulties and pitfalls. Now multiple meaning or compound multiple meaning of any expression in literary text tends to pose certain serious problems for translators in general and creative translators in particular. Now, if we could take, for instance, as an example, the Arabic expression nafahatul uns. Nafahatul uns is one compound word, and make a list of some of the alternatives meaning. I mean, there are so many meanings for this expression. You know, and how are we going to translate nafahatul uns? Now, if we look at the list, look at the list. Now look at this list of meanings of the word nafahat. Nafahat, uns. Nafahat, we have so many words. And uns, we have so many words. But you need to put of to make them a compound word. Now, nafahatul uns is the compound word in Arabic, but in English you need to really use the of construction, like nafahat, gusts, puffs, outburst, breath of winds, diffusing other scents, fragrance, fragrant breezes, fragrant gales, and so on. Again, uns. Being intimate is different from being sociable or sociableness, humbleness, familiarity, friendliness, love, affection, society, companionship, cheerfulness, serenity, tranquility. You know, so all these expressions or all these words could mean uns. We'll see, for instance, here. Let's see. Now, you remember the practical, I mean, last seminar I gave you a practical about translating certain expressions. Now, how did you translate نفحات من الإيمان في مكة والمدينة المنورة, نفحات الأنس في دبي, ليالي الأنس في باريس? Was your answer in line with it? It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but you know, this could be an example. For instance, نفحات من الإيمان في مكة, outbursts of humbleness, serenity, or faith in Mecca and Medina al-Munawwara. Now, نفحات الأنس في دبي, diffusing odors of friendly atmosphere in Dubai. I don't know whether anyone has been, I'm sure some of you must have been to Dubai, but I once, I had this trip on the ship in a canal that split Dubai into two parts. A very nice canal of the sea, and I had this dinner on the ship. So I really felt, you know, this breeze coming through. It was really nice atmosphere, and diffusing odors means nafahat al-uns. Here, al-uns means friendly atmosphere. There was a very, very nice friendly atmosphere on the ship. So we had the barbecue, we were happy, we were chatting along, and so on. This kind of uns, you can translate it in friendly atmosphere. You cannot translate it, for instance, intimacy, no way, or shop. You know, you need to understand the context. But if you go to France and you say, okay, ليالي الأنس في Paris, or ليالي الأنس في London. Now here, nights of friendliness and intimacy in Paris, because, you know, every word has its own connotation. So these are just examples to show you that compound words could cause some problems for translators. You need to be aware of. All right? Okay. Now, here. Now the most problematic aspect of translation of creative writing is when you are trying to translate the rhyming and the versification of the poetry. Rhyming, it means can you make, for instance, the translation of these two lines in English into poetry in Arabic? Can you? And you have to, when you're writing it in Arabic, you need to make sure that it rhymes. Now, I would like to show you how I have translated these two lines. And again, I gave you this as practical. I expect of you that you have translated this, okay? And you can check whether you have translated. When he smelled the scent of the rose, he wants to see it. When he sees the face of the rose, he wants to pluck it. Now, you check yourself. I'm not going to tell you which is the right one, but I'm sure you can tell right away which one of the following options, which one of the following options that has a rhyme and a sign of being verse or poetry. A, I don't know. Was your answer in line with the following? Which one is the most appropriate translation of, the above two English lines of poetry? A, عندما يشم رائحة الوردة يريد أن يراها عندما يرى وجه الوردة يريد أن يقطفها. Now this is the literal meaning of the above one. Now you say to me, this is correct, Dr. Halima. Okay, it is correct, but it is not creatively translated. Look and listen to B. إن شمها استحلى رؤيتها وإن رآها استحلى قطافها. Now, I leave it to you. I'm not going to assess which is better than the other, but I would like you to, create or to build this power of assessing creative writing. C, listen to C. عبيرها استهواه فطلب رؤياها ولما رآها أرادها. Now you can tell, this is version C. Now listen to D. And as I said, can you translate the above two into poetry? Now listen to this. إن شم ريح الورد في أغصانها فمناه في ألوانها وبهاها وبدوت في ثوب الجمال فكنت بين أصابعي رباه ما أحلاها. Now listen. This is poetry, and this is beautiful translation of the above two lines. Some of you might say, oh well, Dr. Halima, you have gone a bit too far from the main context. No. Try to analyze the Arabic translation, and you can tell that there is a lot of similarities between the English and the Arabic in terms of form and in terms of content. The form, I wanted to make it like poetry, so I leave it to you. Which one would you go for? See, just give you an example, and I would like to repeat once and twice that you need to practice. You don't have to come up with a poetic translation of any poetry, but this is the maximum. If you want to be really a creative writer, you get to that stage of expertise and experience and ability, So, okay. Now we move to this the fifth type of problems you might face in a creative translation. The fifth type is cultural allusion. Now, in cultural allusion, it means in our culture there are certain words that have their own references. They have their own connotations in our culture. Now, I'm sure you have heard of the 1001 Nights story or novel, and the most popular expression used is "Open Sesame." Now, how would you translate "Open Sesame" into English or into Arabic? What is the cultural reference of "Open Sesame"? Now, some people might say, oh well, it means you are coming into supernatural power, and you say to Al Jinni, please open Sesame, open this gate, of this cave, so that I can go in and get all this gold and jewels and so on. Now, probably in our old times, in our culture, long time ago, you know, we used to have in all these palaces somebody probably sitting behind the door, and his name was Sesame, you know. So open Sesame, probably Sesame is the name of the person who used to open the gate when visitors come into the palace to see the responsible person in the palace, you know. So you need to really be aware of all these difficulties, and refer to your culture, or to English culture, or Arabic culture, or Chinese culture, or French culture, to understand the connotations of these words. So this is another example. Now, again, you might find difficulties and problems in technical terms. Technical terms, you need to understand the term very well and the context of it. Like you say to me, okay, love. This is a technical term. It's very difficult to translate love, by the way. I know some of you might say, oh well, it's hub or ashq. No. Now listen to these three examples. These three examples will tell you, you know, the meaning, the different meaning in every example. Now, in a play called As You Like It by Shakespeare, a character called Celia says to Touchstone, another person. Now, she says to him, probably she was his fiancée, you know, and she says to him, look, my father's love is enough to honor him enough. Speak no more of him. You will be whipped for taxation one of these days. In other words, it says to him, look, my father's love is enough for you, so you better behave and be happy with me, with my father's. You know, my father's love is enough for you to be happy with. Now, the second example of love is in Romeo and Juliet. Romeo says, in sadness, cousin, I do love a woman. Now, here, love, as the meaning of love we all know, a love between a woman and a man. Now, the third one, on another occasion, he says, is love a tender thing? It is too rough, too rude, too boisterous, and pricks like thorn. Here, the meaning of love means the concept of love, as a concept. So these are just examples to show you that you need to be aware of certain technical terms. Now, we are talking about creative writing, you know. That's why you can feel that most of the examples are related to literature, literary texts, whether they are in poetry, drama, novels, short stories, and inshallah in the coming seminars or lectures we will be talking about examples from the Quran, from the Hadith, from the speeches of our great Khalifas, and so on and so forth. So we'll take one by one. Okay, now, how would you translate? How would you translate love? Would you translate it A, al-hub, B, al-ushq, C, kilahuma ma'an, D, or ghayrahuma? Again, I leave it to you. As a little exercise for you, I would like you, does Arabic make any distinction between the following expressions? Try to provide a creative translation for, let's say, A, very hot, too hot. Can you come up with a creative translation of very hot and too hot? Cool and cold. What's the difference between cool and cold? Is there a word for cool, and is there a word in Arabic for cold? And is there any, how would you translate al-ushq and al-mahabba into English, you know? So these are posing a lot of difficulties for translators, especially who are specialized in creative translation or creative writing. Now, the most difficult bit is the last one. The last one is the translation of concepts that lack a counterpart in the target language. In other words, there are certain concepts in our culture you cannot find a counterpart in the other lecture, like al-dhikr, wazkurullah, izkurullah. No, this concept doesn't exist in English or in English culture. And how would you translate it? Would you translate it like litany? Or would you translate it like, remembering? Look at this here. How would you translate dhikr or dhikr? Would you translate it as remembering? Litany? Litany, ibtihal. Ibtihal is different from al-dhikr in Arabic. Subhanallah, 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 alhamdulillah, subhanallah, walhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah. Now this concept of dhikr doesn't exist in English. You need to be aware of this. How would you translate dhikr here? Would you say remembering? Would you say litany? Would you say praising exercise? Would you say dhikr or zikr? Would you say invocation or supplication? So you need to really be aware of all these concepts that do not have, counterpart. It means equivalence or words similar in our culture, in English culture, or in the English language even. Okay. Now, as a practical exercise for you, for lecture number 2, I would like you to translate the following expression into Arabic. Use your own imagination. So this is an exercise for you. Okay? Divine love, platonic love, brotherly love, and profane love. Now the practical B, translate the following into English. Use your creative ability in your translation. Again, I would like you to translate this at home, because again and again I say this is a practical course. You need to work at home in addition to this. عن عبد الله بن عمر قال عمر بن الخطاب لو كان الصبر والشكر بعيرين ما باليت أيهما ركبت رضي الله عنه رضي الله عنه رضي الله عنه. This is an exercise for you to work on, and I would like to thank you very much for listening to me and watching me, and I wish you all the best. Thank you. Goodbye.